I'm going to be talking about probably something that's even lower on the totem pole than what these guys were talking about. You think drama's low, art is low, try agriculture. So the story is called Seeing Double Green, and most of you are probably thinking, you know, ha ha ha, that's probably about green things that you grow. But no, it's actually, the first green is money, the second green is environmental. And how does this thing work? Lower left? Ah, good. Right, so farming or agriculture is a business. So I remember once upon a time, I had a friend, and I remember her being completely flabbergasted one day when she realized that a bank was a business. So here was this institution that was taking her money and making money off of it. She was just incensed. So I'm not really sure why, but I think banks, since then, people are more accepting of the fact that they're business. Is everybody aware that banks are a business? They're not run by the government, and they're not some kind of social aid kind of thing. Well, here's another one. A farm is a business. How many people are aware that farms are a business? Like pure business? Excellent. I don't have to go into all those stories. So the sole objective of any business is to make money. And like any other business, profits are simply revenues minus expenses. And farm revenue is tied to what? Crop yields. So how much stuff you can get from where. And I mean, expenses are primarily in the form of seeds, inputs, operation costs. I mean, you can list the whole thing out. The number of things that a farmer has to deal with on a daily basis in terms of expenses, and I mean, it's just, if you think of Apple Corporation and how big they are, and how many people are involved, and how many managers are involved, and how much stuff comes in, and how much stuff goes out of each of their factories, think of a farmer as managing all of that by himself. And typically they do, because they don't really have a whole lot of help. But farms, like any other business, are loath to change their processes. Why? Because if you're profitable, or you're making any money, what's the chance that you're going to want to change your business process or jeopardize your revenue or jeopardize how you get your groceries or feed your kids or how you do things like that? So I once read, my ex-wife was a marketing guru, and one of the things that she brought up once upon a time was that, I think somebody wrote somewhere, you know, over the gates of hell, over the gates of marketing and business evolution hell are the words cash cow. The moment you have something that makes money, you don't want to move. You don't want to go anywhere, you don't want to do anything, you just want to do that. So when you go talk to farmers, and I've done this a few times, you walk onto the farming operation, oh, I've got all these brilliant ideas, you can do all these wonderful things, and basically they just go, my grandfather did it this way, my father did it this way, I'm doing it this way. You know, the farm's been here for 100 years. So only the bravest businesses and the bravest people will take on the challenge of trying to change. That being said, any farmer will react to the argument that you can make more money doing something else. So they will at least listen. The other thing that's interesting about farmers and the fact that the farmer is a business is how much trouble are we in if tomorrow businesses figure, or farmers figure out that there's more money in growing rocks than there is in growing food. Do you have a right to eat? I mean, in the US, the Second Amendment, you have a right to carry a gun. You don't have a right to eat. So I think we should be nice to the farmers, which is what I'm going to try to do. Environmentally, farmers and farms are viewed as a source of pollution. I know a few environmental people, government people, looking into where all the pollution, say Lake Erie, where you get some of the algae blooms, Rondo Bay, which is perpetually filled with all sorts of interesting chemicals. Farms are typically, the farms in the Rondo area or in that watershed are typically blamed for the amount of chemicals and things like that that are in the lake. So, you know, really the question is, what do you do about it? Now, who's the guy who probably wants that to happen the least? Who wants less chemicals in the lake more than you do? Is it the environmental guy at the government whose job it is to clean up these lakes and waters and has no idea how? Or is it the farmer who paid for all that stuff and it's now in the lake? Is it helping his crops? No, it's in the lake. It's feeding fish and algae. It's not creating any food. It's not helping you either, in two ways. One, it's polluting your water, and two, you don't have the food that could have resulted from it. So really limiting and controlling pollution from farms is really in everybody's interest, and especially in the farmer's interest because it's a business. So how about the greenest of green stories? What would that look like? Something that helps the farmer make money. One of the greens is money. And the other green is we save the environment, less pollution. So it's a green story. How come everybody hasn't heard of this yet? We're all interested in green. We're all interested in money. We're all interested in the environment and keeping everything safe for our children and everything else. Farmers are certainly interested because they want to make more. They're a business. What does a business want to do? Generate more revenue for the shareholders. Most of them are the only shareholders, so they really want to make more money for themselves. So how do you get there? Well, you figure out a system where you're not going to lose any of that, the money that you spend on seeds, the money you spend on inputs or chemicals, all gets absorbed. So how do you do that? So that's one of the things that we've been looking at for the last, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. I mean, the funniest part of the thing is that the government actually wants to legislate farmers to not pollute. Okay, you're going to tell a guy, don't lose more money, please. Do you really need to tell a business to do that? So how do you do this? There's a concept in precision agriculture called management zones. So you take a farm field and you break it up into sub-areas. And each area, I don't know how many of you have grown stuff in your backyard or maybe even your front lawn. Is it the same all the way across? Not these days. It used to be when you could get ChemLawn and they'd show up and the guy with the hazmat suit would come and spray that crap all over your place and you couldn't let your dog out for 3 weeks. That's when the grass was the same. These days, not so much, because you can't do that anymore. So your grass is different from here to there to here. It's just the same in a farm field. So the idea is, if a farm field grows things differently in different areas, apply inputs where they're needed. Don't apply inputs where they're not needed. Simple, right? Okay, maybe a bit more complicated. So how do you define management zones? There was a technology that was invented some years ago called GPS. Maybe some of you are familiar with it. It's making its way into the farming world. I am told that there are probably 10, maybe 20 farmers in Canada who are fully up on GPS and the full use of GPS for agriculture. All of the upcoming machinery is geared towards GPS and being able to use GPS in an effective way, some of which I will describe. So this complicated looking map was created by a combine or a harvester measuring how much stuff there is, how much crop there is per area in the field. So reds are low, blues are high. So what do you need to start in order to do something like this? Here's a picture of a harvester. It's actually a harvester in the back. There's a tractor in the front, but the artist basically put the two together, and getting them to separate them out was just an argument I didn't feel like having. So typically the GPS device will be in the cab. There's a yield monitor, and the way it works is the combine takes in corn. It goes up into here, and this most unbelievably huge turbine thing that somehow spins corn around, and there's cobs that come out the end, completely picked clean, like cleaner than I can even imagine, and all the corn somehow ends up in that big hopper at the top, where it gets measured by a yield monitor. This is the process, or at least an illustration of the process of how a combine will measure yield. This was actually done by a couple of students at Niagara College. So there's your kind of idealization of a yield monitor. Some, nice simulated corn with your simulated combine and your simulated tractor and simulated hopper, simulated GPS. The colors underneath, if you'll notice, underneath the tractor and the combine correspond to what you're measuring. So the idea is you're measuring a map of yield and how much is where, or how much corn there is per area. Should have put a soundtrack in. Well, I thought, 1 minute of this stuff. So that gives you the relative idea of the size of a combine to some of the fields that they're actually operating on. So when you're operating one of these things, you're sitting up there for days on a field that size. And again, it's one of the areas where nobody wants to play. Like, your kids don't want to be a farmer. Nobody who goes to the school wants to be a farmer. So the only people who are willing to drive those things are the people who've been around for 100 years. And unfortunately, they're the ones that don't want to change because they've been doing it for 100 years and, they know better than you. So what you get out of the combine is a map of yield, but you also get this other thing, which is this map of elevation, three-dimensional surface map, or digital elevation map, as I'm constantly being corrected. So RTK GPS, which is the high-precision version of GPS, gives the combine the ability to read the yield across the field and the ability to know where the highs and lows are. So one of the things that you've got to do is to begin to look for patterns. If you want to figure out how to take advantage of something, there needs to be a pattern. So the first rule of thumb for scientists, which I'm constantly saying to my students, you got to look for stability. If you can find stability in what you're doing, there is probably something underlying it or driving it. So any process that's stable typically has some underlying thing. Do you see any stability? This is 12 years of yield maps. The only hiccup, which is where's the laser thing? Anyway, this red part right there is just a little anomaly right there. That was a drainage problem that happened 1 year. So the rest of it is totally stable, right? So you have stability, you have something you can take advantage of. Did they look similar? So one of them is your yield map, and another one is a topology map telling you the height of the field. Do you see any similarities? That's a bit hard to see, but I have some 3D skills, so I threw the digital elevation map into 3D Studio Max to show that we can create the actual three-dimensional surface of the field, just demonstrating, that this actually is what the 3D surface would look like. And I've actually been in the field, and it actually works. That is what the field looks like. So when we place the yield map on top of the surface map, we begin to have the realization that the higher elevations, or the tops of the knolls or the tops of the surfaces in the farm field, are where you get less yield, and the depressions are where you get more. Does everybody see that, more or less? You're just nodding because I'm standing up here. And, So if you see that, that's good, because now we have a basis for figuring out management zones, which is really, as far as I wanted to take you today. Because, boy, is there a bunch of technology behind this. So if your field can actually do this, and you can actually see this in your farm field, then you can begin to do this process. And the underlying dynamics of the thing is functionally dynamics, because the height of the surfaces, the height of the field, how it undulates, where there are channels, is all guided by water. And water is the primary thing that drives your yield, drives how much revenue the farmer is going to have. So taking advantage of that in this way can lead to higher yields. So take advantage, if a farmer will listen and take advantage of this, both yield stability and this idea that your stability is based on your dynamics, then they can achieve higher yields. And they can achieve greater revenues and generate less pollution. Because one of the things that you see, if I can actually get the thing back. One of the things that you can see is, so if you imagine, if you were to take an even amount of fertilizers or an even amount of chemicals and put them across the entire field, the parts that are at the top aren't going to use any of it, right? Because they have low yield. The parts that are in these low channels are going to use most of it. So what I said at the beginning is, add inputs where things are going to grow, don't add inputs where they're not. And that will functionally guide kind of how your revenue works. The problem is you're kind of stuck with the field that you've got, right? So if you're listening to the field and it's telling you where things grow and where things don't grow, you kind of have to listen. So that's probably another step, or another hurdle that people have to get over at some point. Anyway, so the next stop, oops, wrong button. The next stop, take advantage, and the recipe for first timers, and kind of where I wanted to get with this, is if you can map the dynamics and map the topology of the field, you have the beginning of management zones, you have the beginning of the double green story, and you have profitability and happy farmers who continue to make you food even if you don't have a right to eat.